Good morning, aspirants. It's 14th of November today, and I welcome you all on today's series of What to Read in the Hindu Newspaper. I'm 𝗗𝗶𝗹𝘆 𝗡𝗲, Senior Mentor at Prepp IAS. While going through the articles, we will not only see its relevance with regard to prelims and mains, but we'll also try interlinking it with other GS papers as well. I'm here to align your newspaper reading as a part of our GS syllabus. So let's get started. The very first article that is worth our attention in today's paper is about urgent update. India needs to revise its consumer price index urgently. Now, this is relevant for GS paper 3 economy and also GS paper 2 governance. The key theme that has been talked about is the factual information that we have with regard to CPI, also the recent committee with regard to it, wherein the shifting of CPI base here has been talked about. What could be the implications for it? Which institution is responsible for updation and data collection? What would be the long-term impact for the change of data sheet itself? So this is how this particular article is to be read and revised. The next important article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about Donald Trump shakes up global nuclear order. So this is relevant for GS paper 2 IR, where global arms control, India-US relations could be analyzed. Also relevant for GS paper 3 security, wherein nuclear doctrine, strategic stability can be underlined. The key theme that has been talked in this particular article is about shift in global nuclear stability as US leadership changes stance on deterrence, arms control treaties and alliances with ripple effect for Europe, Asia, India and non-proliferation norms. For prelims perspective, we got to revise nuclear treaties such as knowing about NPT, what was the purpose for it, which all are the members for this. CTBT, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and New START Treaty that has been talked about. We got to revise also the associated concepts such as nuclear triad, what is deterrence, what is arms control, the agencies involved with regard to it, such as IAEA, UNSC P5, and India's nuclear posture basics with regard to it. Then, from mains perspective, the analysis part could be drawn from this particular article in a manner what this shift means for global governance, in particular global nuclear governance. Then impact on Russia-China dynamics, implication for India's doctrine of credible minimum deterrence, risk to global non-proliferation regimes that has been signed and talked about, and also strategic autonomy recalibration for India. Is it the time or not? This is how this particular article is to be read and revised. The next important article that is there in paper and catches our attention talks about the Tamil Nadu model of sub-state climate action. Now, this is relevant for GS paper 3, environment and climate change, and also GS paper 2, governance, wherein decentralization and sub-national policy framework, how when implemented in some state is working out really well. The key theme that has been talked in this particular article is about a state level climate governance success stories, primarily the Tamil Nadu, which has institutionalized climate missions, data backed adaptation, district level climate cells, and a model for India's federal climate architecture that could be replicated in other states as well. For prelims perspective, the arenas that we have to read and revise is about state action plan on climate change, climate funds, climate missions, key concepts versus adaptation versus mitigation, what is carbon budget. For mains perspective, we can analyze this particular article in a manner how subnational governments can operationalize climate resilience, Tamil Nadu's institutional innovations in a form of advisory councils and green budgeting, challenges with regard to financing, capacity gaps, localized vulnerabilities, and also the replicability of other states that can be done in similar manner, and India's NDC targets that we have to revise. This is how this particular article is to be thoroughly read and revised, not only the core concept and the primarily issue that has been talked about, but a broader picture and a helicopter view of climate action plan is to be seen. The next important article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is on text and context page. And this talks about, can Tamil Nadu reforms change transgender healthcare? Now, this is relevant for GS Paper 1 Society, wherein gender, vulnerable sections, GS Paper 2 Welfare Schemes, Healthcare and Governance, GS Paper 4 Ethics, Human Dignity and Equity can be linked. The key theme that has been discussed over here is Tamil Nadu's attempt to bring dignity-centered, evidence-based reforms for transgender society, in particular the healthcare, wherein ending gatekeepers, improving access, and creating institutional safeguards has been the backbone for this particular framework. For prelims perspective, we got to revise Transgender Person Protection of Rights Act 2019, the provisions of this, afterwards, National Transgender Portal, basic features of gender affirming healthcare. For mains perspective, we got to revise systemic issues, the stigma associated with them, lack of trained medical staffs, out-of-pocket cost. Afterwards, Tamil Nadu reforms based on informal consent, comprehensive guidelines, and grievance mechanism that can be replicated in other states as well. Why healthcare for transgender person is a social justice which is imperative. What can India learn from other world best practices that we have, substantiating it with protocols and data systems? The next important article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about holding up glass to India securing stewardship to tackle AMR, relevant for GS Paper 2, Healthcare, International Organization, also GS Paper 3, Science and Tech, Biotech, Disaster Management, as it can be called as a public health crisis in the form of rising antimicrobial resistance cases. The key theme that has been talked about is India's AMR threat mapped through WHO GLASS, revealing high resistance level, particularly in hospitals, raising questions of stewardship, surveillance, and policy implementation. For prelims perspective, we have to revise what is GLASS, a global antimicrobial resistance surveillance system launched by WHO. Terminologies such as what is superbug, stewardship, nosocomial infections, India's AMR initiatives with regard to National Action Plan on AMR, ICMR stewardship program. For mains perspective, why AMR, that is antimicrobial resistance, is a silent pandemic for India. ICU overdose, OTC antibiotics, over-the-counter, pharma waste drivers, policy steps and gaps that has been surveillance, enforcement, and prescription practices. And this is how this particular article is to be holistically revised. The next very important article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is talking about Supreme Court bats for protection of pristine sal forest in Jharkhand, Saranda, relevant for GS Paper 3 Environment, Forest Conservation, GS Paper 2 Judiciary, Judicial Intervention and Environment Governance. The key theme that has been talked about is Supreme Court's push to shield one of the India's most biodiverse sal forest from mining pressure, balancing development with ecological irreplaceability. For prelims perspective, we need to know the characteristics, distribution of sal forest in India, Forest Conservation Act of 1980, its amendment, the recent one, wildlife corridors and elephant habitat basics. For For mains perspective, we got to revise ecological value of Saranda forest, Supreme Court's environmental jurisprudence with regard to precautionary principles and sustainable development, mining versus livelihood versus conservation debate. This is how this particular article is to be seen from today's paper. And the last important article for the day is about India's carbon emission rise slower this year, says report. Now, this is relevant with regard to GS paper 3 environment, climate change and energy, also relevant for GS paper 3 economy, energy transition. Then the key theme that has been discussed over here is this acceleration in India's carbon emission growth due to renewable expansion, cooler summers and improved energy efficiency, and moderation in power sector emissions as well. From prelims perspective, we have to revise carbon intensity, emission factors, India's renewable milestones, COP pledges and NDC targets. For mains perspective, we have to revise why emission is slowed, sectoral wise analysis, that is power industry, infrastructure industry, transport industry, which one contributes the most, what this mean for India's 2070 vision of net zero, policy takeaways, that is grid reforms, clean tech diffusion and behavioral changes. This is how this particular article is to be holistically seen, read and revised. This is all from my end for today's Hindu newspaper. Till we meet for the next time, take care and goodbye.